I locked my daughter-in-law and her accomplice inside my bedroom last night.
Not with a door lock.
With a 200-pound mahogany chest, I pushed across the doorway. They were inside with forged guardianship papers, planning to have me declared mentally incompetent so they could steal my house and demolish it. I'm 68 years old, and I just caught them red-handed. So I trapped them in that room and called the police. They thought a confused old woman would be easy prey.
They were wrong.
But first, something important. Drop your name and location below. I feature subscribers as characters in every story. Subscribe so you don't miss out. Let me tell you how a 68-year-old woman outsmarted two criminals who thought I was too old and confused to fight back. This is my Victorian house in eastern Pennsylvania, in what used to be called Steel Town, back when the mills were running and families like mine built lives that actually meant something. My husband Walter worked the foundry for 37 years before his heart gave out 5 years ago, and this house was his gift to me after 4 decades of saving every penny we could spare. 3 stories of original brick, hand-restored crown molding, hardwood floors refinished every decade for a century, and stained glass windows that depicted our town's founding in colors that caught the afternoon sun like jewels. Walter loved this house the way some men love cars or golf, with a devotion that bordered on worship. I remember the day he decided to restore the crown molding, 20 years ago when he'd just retired from the foundry and needed a project to keep his hands busy. The Victorian crown molding in our living room had been damaged by a roof leak, water stains turning the intricate woodwork dark and warped in places that broke Walter's heart every time he looked at it. He started work at 6 every morning, me bringing him lunch around noon with sandwiches and lemonade, watching him measure and cut and sand with the patience of a man who understood that some things couldn't be rushed. "Bernice," he'd say during those lunch breaks, wiping sawdust from his hands onto his work jeans, "this house is our legacy. When we're gone, this will still be here, and people will know that Walter and Bernice Kowalski built something beautiful." It took him 3 months to finish, and the night he completed the last section, he pulled me into the living room to admire his work in the lamplight. "We did it, Bernie," he said, using the nickname he'd given me on our first date 45 years earlier. "We built something that lasts." Every evening after that, Walter and I had a ritual of standing by the stained glass window in the stairwell as the sun set, watching light filter through colored glass that showed the steel mill, the workers, the families that built this town. "This window tells our town's story," Walter would say, his arm around my shoulders. "Steel mills and families and hard work. That's us, Bernie. That's what we come from. And it'll be here long after we're gone," I'd reply, leaning into him. "That's why I'm setting up the life estate," he told me one evening, about a year before he passed away. "To protect this house. To protect you. Because I know how the world works, and I know someone might try to take advantage of an old woman living alone in a valuable property." Walter knew things I didn't want to believe back then, that people would see me as vulnerable, that they'd look at this house and see dollar signs instead of history. But Walter's gift came with more than sentiment. It came with legal protection he'd spent months arranging with our lawyer, Robert Chen. The life estate meant I had the absolute right to live here until I passed away, and only then would ownership transfer to our son Travis. Nobody could force me out. Nobody could sell it without my permission, and the property couldn't be seized or demolished as long as I was living. Smart man, my Walter. He understood that the best protection against predators was making sure they couldn't legally touch what they wanted to steal. Travis is our only child, working on an oil rig in the North Sea, doing 12-week rotations followed by 4 weeks off. Dangerous work that paid well enough to support his wife, Ashley, while she pursued what she called her dreams of becoming a house flipper. House flipper. That's what they call people who buy old homes, strip out everything that makes them unique, paint everything the same soulless white, and sell them for profit to people who don't know the difference between a house and a home. 6 months ago, Ashley moved into my house while Travis was overseas on one of his rotations. She said it would be easier than maintaining their apartment while he was gone, that she'd keep me company and help around the house. I said yes, because I'm a mother, and mothers help their children, even when something deep in your gut whispers that you're making a terrible mistake. From the very first day Ashley moved in, she looked at my house like it was diseased, like the beauty Walter and I had spent decades creating was somehow offensive to her modern sensibilities. The crown molding Walter had restored by hand, she called outdated and heavy. The original hardwood floors that had been refinished lovingly every decade, she dismissed as scratched and dark and ugly. The stained glass window showing our town's founding, the one Walter and I stood beside every evening, she called depressing and old-fashioned. I should have known something was wrong when the business meetings started. Expensive-looking men in suits carrying briefcases and rolled blueprints, spreading papers across my grandmother's dining table like they owned the place. Business meetings, Ashley called them, saying she was learning the real estate development game from experienced professionals. One of those professionals was Trey Sterling, 35 years old, with slicked back hair and teeth so white they looked artificial. He ran Sterling Development, the company that had been systematically buying properties in our neighborhood for 2 years. And every single house they touched got demolished within a month. They'd replace these beautiful Victorian homes with luxury condos that started at $400,000, pricing out every family that had lived here for generations. Ashley introduced Trey as her business mentor, someone teaching her how real estate really worked. I didn't like the way he looked at her, or the way she looked at him. But I'm 68 years old, and I've learned that suspicion needs proof before it becomes accusation. 2 weeks after Ashley moved in, I came home from the grocery store to find my living room furniture rearranged. Walter's favorite reading chair moved from its spot by the window where it had sat for 20 years. I stood in the doorway holding bags of groceries, staring at the disruption of my carefully maintained space. "Ashley," I said carefully, keeping my voice level even as anger started building in my chest. "Why did you move Walter's chair?" She looked up from her phone with an expression of mild irritation, like I'd interrupted something important. "It was blocking the natural light flow," she said dismissively. "The room feels so much more open now, don't you think?" "That chair has been in that exact spot for 20 years, I replied, setting down the groceries with more force than necessary. Walter sat there every evening, reading his newspapers. "Exactly," Ashley said, with a little laugh that felt like a slap. 20 years in one spot. That's the problem, Mrs. Kowalski. Time for a change, don't you think? "I'd like it back where it was," I said, firmly. Ashley sighed the way people down when they think you're being difficult about something they've decided is trivial. "Mrs. Kowalski, you have to trust me on design things," she said, her voice taking on that patient tone people use when explaining something to a child. "I studied interior design in college. I know what I'm doing." "This is my home," I said, my voice hardening in a way I rarely let it. "Not a design project." "Of course it's your home," she replied smoothly. "But Travis wants me to help modernize things, make the space more functional for you as you get older." "Did Travis specifically say that?" I asked, because my son had never once suggested I needed help with my house. "He trusts my judgment," Ashley said, turning back to her phone. "Maybe you should too, Mrs. Kowalski." I moved the chair back myself that afternoon, every muscle in my 68-year-old body protesting the effort, but I'd be damned if I'd let someone rearrange Walter's favorite spot without his permission. The first month after Ashley moved in, she started bringing friends over for what she called property tours. Young women in expensive athleisure wear who wandered through my home making notes on their phones. I was in the kitchen making tea when I heard Ashley's voice carrying from the living room, pitched loud enough that I knew she didn't care if I overheard. "See this crown molding?" she was saying to her friends. "So outdated and heavy, it makes the whole room feel closed in. Nobody wants Victorian details anymore. Everything's about clean lines and minimalist aesthetics now." I stood frozen at the kitchen counter, my hand tightening around the teacup until my knuckles went white. Walter had spent 3 months restoring that crown molding, working every day until his hands were rough and his back ached, because he believed in preserving beautiful things. But I didn't say anything, didn't march into that room and defend Walter's work, because Ashley was young and didn't understand, and surely she'd learn to appreciate what we'd built here. 2 months in, Ashley cornered me in the hallway with what she framed as a helpful suggestion. "Mrs. Kowalski," she said, that bright smile on her face that never quite reached her eyes. "I've been thinking about these hardwood floors." "What about them?" I asked warily. "Well, they're so scratched and dark," she said, gesturing at floors that Walter and I had refinished ourselves just 5 years ago. "Have you thought about replacing them with laminate? It would really brighten up the space." "These floors are original to the house," I said, keeping my voice steady. "They've been refinished every decade for over a century." "Exactly," Ashley said with a little laugh. "They're ancient, Mrs. Kowalski. Nobody wants old floors anymore. Laminate is so much easier to maintain, and it looks modern." Walter refinished these floors himself, I told her. Every 10 years, like clockwork, stripping and sanding and applying new finish until they glowed like honey. "That's very sweet," she said in a tone that dismissed 40 years of careful maintenance as sentimental nonsense. "But maybe it's time to think about what would actually increase the property value instead of holding on to the past." I walked away before I said something I'd regret, my hands shaking with an anger I hadn't felt in years. 3 months after Ashley moved in, I was standing by the stained glass window having my morning coffee, watching colored light paint patterns on the hardwood Walter had loved so much. Ashley came down the stairs in her designer pajamas, took one look at the window, and made a sound of disgust. "God, this window makes everything so dark and depressing," she said, not even acknowledging my presence. "First thing I'd do is replace it with modern glass, let in some actual natural light instead of this gloom." My hand tightened around my coffee cup so hard, I half expected it to shatter. "This window depicts our town's founding," I said quietly. "The steel mills, the workers, the families that built this community. It's irreplaceable." "Everything's replaceable, Mrs. Kowalski," Ashley said breezily. "For the right price, anything can be updated and improved." That's when I knew something was fundamentally wrong. That this wasn't about youth or different tastes, but about something darker I didn't yet understand. 4 months in, the business meetings escalated from occasional to weekly. Men in expensive suits arriving with briefcases full of documents and blueprints that they spread across my dining table. I'd see them through the doorway, Ashley leaning over papers with an intensity that had nothing to do with learning and everything to do with planning. One afternoon, I walked into the dining room and asked the question that had been building for weeks. "Ashley," I said, standing in the doorway with my arms crossed, "who are all these men coming to my house every week?" She looked up with an expression of barely concealed annoyance. "Business associates, Mrs. Kowalski," she said impatiently. "I told you I'm learning about real estate development." "Learning real estate development in my dining room?" I asked. "It's just meetings," she replied, gathering papers into a pile as if to hide them from my view. "Nothing for you to worry about." "I saw blueprints of this house," I said, taking a step into the room. "Why would your business associates need blueprints of my house?" "For property assessment," she said quickly. "Standard procedure in real estate." "Assessment for what?" I pressed. Ashley stood up, her expression hardening into something I'd never seen before. "You wouldn't understand, Mrs. Kowalski," she said dismissively. "It's complicated business stuff." "I negotiated union contracts for 40 years, I said quietly. "I think I can handle complicated, Ashley." "Try me." "This is different," she snapped. "This is actual business, not factory floor negotiations." "My house is not your business," I said, my voice dropping to the tone I'd used in negotiation rooms when management tried to push too far. Ashley's face went through several expressions before settling on something that looked almost like triumph. "Actually, it will be," she said. "Eventually." "What does that mean?" I asked. "Nothing," she said quickly, as if realizing she'd revealed too much. "Forget I said anything, Mrs. Kowalski." But I didn't forget. And that night, I started doing what I'd learned to do in 40 years of union work. I started documenting everything. 5 months after Ashley moved in, Trey Sterling's black Mercedes started appearing in my driveway multiple times a week. I watched from the kitchen window one Tuesday afternoon as he pulled up, all confident swagger and expensive suit. And I made a decision to meet this man who Ashley claimed was just a business mentor. The doorbell rang and I answered before Ashley could get there. Trey Sterling stood on my porch with a smile that was probably supposed to be charming, but struck me as calculated. "Mrs. Kowalski," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Trey Sterling, Ashley's business mentor." I shook his hand, noting the firmness of his grip that bordered on aggressive. "Mr. Sterling," I said evenly, "Ashley's mentioned you. She tells me you've lived in this house for decades," he said, his eyes already cataloging the porch, the original woodwork, the stained glass visible through the front door. "This house has tremendous potential." "It has history," I corrected. He smiled, and it was the smile of a shark sizing up prey. "History doesn't pay the bills, Mrs. Kowalski," he said. "But prime real estate in a development zone certainly does." "This isn't a development zone," I said. "Not yet," he replied, and something in his tone made my blood run cold. Ashley appeared then, her face lighting up in a way I'd never seen when she looked at my son. "Trey," she said warmly, "come in. We can work in the dining room." I watched them walk up my stairs together, saw the way his hand lingered at the small of her back, and I knew with absolute certainty that whatever was happening in my house had nothing to do with business mentorship. That evening, I went to my computer and started researching Trey Sterling and his company with the methodical thoroughness I'd learned in 40 years of preparing for contract negotiations. Sterling Development had purchased 12 properties in our neighborhood over the past 2 years. Every single one had been demolished within a month of acquisition. In their place stood luxury condominiums priced between $400,000 and $600,000, marketed to young professionals from the city. The families who'd lived in those houses, people I'd known for decades, had been scattered across cheaper neighborhoods or forced into rental apartments they could barely afford. And Trey Sterling had made millions from their displacement. I found newspaper articles about families protesting the demolitions, quotes from elderly homeowners saying they'd been pressured to sell, allegations of predatory tactics that never quite resulted in criminal charges. One article mentioned a lawsuit alleging that Sterling Development had used fraudulent guardianship petitions to gain control of properties from elderly owners. But the case had been settled out of court with non-disclosure agreements. I printed every article, every property record, every piece of evidence I could find, and I put it all in a folder I kept in my desk drawer. The next day at our neighborhood watch meeting, I learned I wasn't the only one who'd noticed Sterling Development's pattern. Mrs. Henderson, who'd lived 3 doors down for 40 years, spoke in a shaking voice about what had happened to the Johnson family. "Another family got bought out last week," she said, twisting her hands in her lap. "The Johnsons? You remember them, Bernice. They got an offer for $200,000 when their house is easily worth $400,000. I frowned, my union negotiator instincts immediately recognizing a predatory lowball offer. "Why would they accept half the value?" I asked. "Because they were scared," Mrs. Henderson said. "Someone told them the neighborhood was declining, that property values would only go down, that they should sell now before it was too late." "Who told them that?" I pressed. "Some developer," she replied. "Trey Sterling from Sterling Development. He said their house needed expensive repairs they couldn't afford, that it would be condemned if they didn't fix it, that selling to him was their only option." I felt anger burn hot in my chest, the same fury I'd felt in negotiation rooms when management lied to workers about the company's finances. "That's fraud," I said quietly. "That's textbook predatory real estate practices." "What can we do?" Mrs. Henderson asked. "The Johnsons already signed." "I don't know yet," I admitted, "but I'm going to find out." That night, I sat at my kitchen table, thinking about Trey Sterling, about Ashley, about the blueprints and the meetings and the way they looked at my house like it was already theirs. I thought about Walter's words from 5 years ago, about how he'd set up the life estate to protect me from exactly this kind of predator. And I thought about something else Walter used to say that came back to me with the force of a revelation. I felt my hands shaking as I held my coffee cup, anger and fear mixing together into something that tasted like metal in my mouth. Trace Sterling had done this before, had displaced families and demolished homes, and made millions from destroying history. And now he was in my house, planning to do the same thing to me. The memory hit me then, sharp and clear, from 20 years ago when I'd faced down the toughest negotiation of my union career. The steel mill management had brought in a new team, suits from corporate headquarters who'd never set foot in a foundry, and they'd tried to intimidate us from the first moment. "You're just a secretary, Mrs. Kowalski," the lead negotiator had said dismissively when I'd sat down across from him. "Maybe you should let the men handle this." I'd smiled at him, opened my briefcase, and pulled out the complete contract with every clause highlighted and annotated. "I'm a CPA with 40 years of financial analysis experience," I'd said quietly, "and I've read every word of this contract, including Clause 7.3 regarding pension protections, which you're currently violating. Shall we discuss that, or would you like to continue making assumptions about who can handle what?" The corporate negotiator's face had gone pale, and by the end of that week, the union had won every protection we'd asked for. I'd learned something crucial in that moment, that documentation and knowledge were more powerful than intimidation, that predators backed down when you showed them you understood exactly what they were trying to do. And now, sitting in my kitchen, with evidence of Trace Sterling's predatory pattern spread across the table, I knew exactly what I needed to do. Walter had protected me with the life estate, but I needed another layer of protection, something that would make this house untouchable no matter what legal tricks Sterling might try. The next morning, I called the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission. "I'm calling about historic landmark designation," I said when someone answered. "For my home in Steeltown." The process was complex, requiring architectural surveys and historical documentation, and proof that the property had significance beyond just being old. But I'd spent 40 years managing complex financial documents and union contracts, and I knew how to navigate bureaucracy. I gathered original blueprints from 1890 that I'd found in the county archives. I compiled photographs of Walter's restoration work, documentation of every careful repair and renovation we'd done to preserve the house's original character. I found newspaper clippings from the town's founding that mentioned the street where our house stood, testimony from steel mill workers who'd lived here when the mills were running. I photographed every detail of the stained glass windows, the hand-carved crown molding, the original hardwood floors that told a century of our town's history. The application took me 3 months to complete, and I submitted it the very day Ashley moved into my house. I didn't tell anyone what I'd done, not Travis, not Robert Chen, my lawyer, because Walter had taught me that the best strategy was the one your opponent didn't see coming. Meanwhile, I continued documenting everything happening in my house with the methodical precision of someone who'd spent decades preparing cases for arbitration. I took photographs of every meeting, noting dates and times when Trace Sterling and his associates arrived. In Pennsylvania, one-party consent laws meant I could legally record conversations. So I kept my phone nearby during every business meeting, capturing discussions about property values and development potential. I made copies of blueprints Ashley carelessly left on the dining table, documents showing proposed condolo-outs for a property that wasn't hers to develop. I compiled financial records showing Sterling Development's pattern of buying properties below market value and flipping them for massive profit. Every piece of evidence went into a folder that grew thicker by the week, insurance against whatever they were planning. 3 weeks ago, I called Robert Chen, the lawyer who'd helped Walter set up the life estate. "Robert," I said when he answered, "I need to understand something about the life estate Walter created." "Of course, Bernice," he replied warmly. What do you need to know? Could someone have me declared incompetent and override the life estate? I asked directly. Robert was quiet for a moment. They could try, he said carefully. They'd need medical evidence showing you're unable to manage your own affairs. Do you have any reason to believe someone might attempt that? Let's say hypothetically I did, I replied. What would they need? A doctor's certification of incompetence, Robert explained. Court-appointed evaluation. Evidence that you're a danger to yourself or unable to handle basic life tasks. But Bernice, if someone tried that with you, they'd have a very difficult time. Why? I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. Because you run the neighborhood watch, Robert said. You organize the historical society meetings. You manage 3 separate investment accounts that Walter left you. And last month, you helped me understand a tax regulation that I'd misinterpreted. You're sharper at 68 than most people half your age. What if I told you I'd applied for historic landmark status for this house? I said. 6 months ago. There was a long pause. Bernice, Robert said slowly, if that designation goes through, this house becomes protected by state law. It cannot be demolished under any circumstances, regardless of who owns it. That's what I thought, I replied. Have you been planning this from the beginning, he asked, and I could hear admiration in his voice. Walter taught me to prepare for the worst and hope for the best, I said. I'm just following his advice. 2 weeks ago, the letter arrived from the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission, official state letterhead with a seal that made my hands shake as I opened it. Dear Mrs. Kowalski, it read, we are pleased to inform you that your property at 1427 Copper Street has been approved for historic landmark designation, effective immediately. I sat at my kitchen table holding that letter, thinking about Walter and everything he'd taught me about protecting what mattered. I didn't tell anyone about the designation, just folded the letter carefully and put it in my desk drawer with all the other evidence I'd been gathering. Some cards you hold close until exactly the right moment to play them. Last Tuesday started like any other, with my union retiree meeting at the community center, where we discussed pension protections and healthcare benefits for former mill workers. I left the meeting at 6:30, earlier than usual because the discussion had wrapped up quickly, and I drove home through streets I'd known for 40 years. Ashley had told me that morning she was driving to Pittsburgh to look at investment properties, that she'd be gone all day. But when I turned onto my street, I saw her car in the driveway, and next to it, Trey Sterling's black Mercedes. I parked on the street instead of pulling into my driveway, some instinct telling me to approach quietly. The house was dark except for a light upstairs, in my bedroom. The bedroom Walter and I had shared for 43 years. I walked through my front door as silently as I could, decades of practice from raising a teenage boy teaching me exactly which floorboards creaked and which ones stayed silent. The house felt empty except for voices coming from upstairs, and I climbed the stairs with my heart pounding, but my mind perfectly clear. The bedroom door was slightly open, and what I heard made me stop cold in the hallway. That's Trey's voice, confident and pleased with himself in a way that made my skin crawl. So once we get the guardianship papers signed, we can have her declared incompetent, he was saying. Then we petition the court to override the life estate based on her inability to maintain the property. Ashley's voice came next, breathless with excitement. And then we can sell? She asked. The developer you lined up is still interested? More than interested, Trey replied. This location is perfect for the new condo project, and the timing couldn't be better. We can have the demolition crew where within 2 weeks of closing. I felt my blood turn to ice. 40 years of union negotiations teaching me to stay calm even when fury threatened to overwhelm rational thought. Wait, Ashley said, and I could hear papers rustling. Who signs the guardianship papers? A doctor I work with, Trey answered. He'll certify she's showing signs of dementia, cognitive decline, the whole package. He's done it before. Very convincing testimony in court. And then what? Ashley pressed. We petitioned to override the life estate, Trey explained patiently. claims she's unable to maintain the property, that it's becoming a safety hazard, that she needs professional care. The court appoints you as guardians, since you're family, and then you have the legal authority to sell. How much are we talking? Ashley asked, all pretense of morality gone from her voice. $2.2 million for the property, Trey said. I flip it to the condo developer for $4 million, and we split the profit. $900,000 each. And Mrs. Kowalski? Ashley asked, and I held my breath, waiting to hear what they'd planned for my future. Nursing home, Trey said dismissively. Medicaid will cover it once we spend down her assets. By next week, she'll be in a facility wondering what happened. And by the week after that, this house will be rubble. When do we start? Ashley asked. Papers are ready, Trey replied. We file tomorrow morning, and by next week, the old lady will be in a home where she belongs. I looked through the crack in the door and saw them on my bed, Walter's bed. Papers spread around them like some obscene business meeting. Legal documents with my forged signature, financial statements I'd never authorized, what looked like a real estate contract with the words immediate demolition highlighted in yellow marker. That's when I noticed my grandmother's mahogany chest, positioned about 6 feet from the bedroom door. Solid wood with reinforced corners, the piece that had traveled from Poland in 1908, carrying everything my grandmother owned in the world. It probably weighed 200 pounds, heavy enough that it took 2 strong men to move it when we'd first brought it upstairs decades ago. But I'd spent 40 years doing physical labor in union halls, setting up folding chairs and carrying boxes of documents and standing for hours during negotiations. I was stronger than people assumed a 68-year-old woman would be. I walked back downstairs, checked that my phone was fully charged, and returned to the hallway outside my bedroom. Then, with strength that came from pure fury and 40 years of union organizing, I gripped the sides of that mahogany chest and pushed. It moved slowly, making almost no sound on the thick carpet, and I positioned it inch by careful inch directly in front of the bedroom door, a perfect barricade that would require a battering ram to move. Inside the room, Ashley and Trey were still talking, completely oblivious to the trap I'd just sprung. Perfect, I thought, pulling out my phone. Let's see how they handle being locked in with their crimes. My first call was to 911. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher asked. I need to report a break-in and fraud in progress, I said calmly. My address is 1427 Copper Street. The perpetrators are currently locked in my bedroom with forged legal documents. Ma'am, the dispatcher said carefully, you're saying someone broke into your house? My daughter-in-law and her accomplice, I corrected. They're inside my bedroom right now discussing how to forge guardianship documents to have me declared incompetent so they can steal my house and demolish it. I've locked them in, and I have recordings of everything they've said. The dispatcher was silent for a moment. Officers are on the way, she said. Please stay on the line. My second call was to Robert Chen. Robert, it's Bernice, I said when he answered. I need you at my house immediately with every piece of documentation we have on the property, including the life estate and anything else relevant. Bernice, what's happening? He asked, his voice sharp with concern. I've caught my daughter-in-law and Trey Sterling in my bedroom with forged guardianship papers, I said. They're planning to have me declared incompetent, override the life estate, and demolish this house. The police are on their way. I'll be there in 15 minutes, Robert said. Don't do anything else until I arrive. My third call required the satellite phone number Travis had given me for emergencies, the only way to reach him when he was on the oil rig in the North Sea. It rang 6 times before he answered, his voice groggy with sleep and the confusion of being woken at 3 a.m. his time. Mom, he said. What's wrong? Is someone hurt? Travis, I said, keeping my voice steady, even though my hands were shaking. Your wife is in my bedroom with Trey Sterling right now. They're not just having an affair, they're forging guardianship documents to have me declared mentally incompetent so they can steal this house and demolish it for a condo development. I've locked them in the bedroom and called the police. I need you to come home." The silence on the other end of the line lasted at least 5 full seconds. "Mom," Travis finally said, his voice suddenly completely awake and shaking with emotion. "Don't do anything else. Don't confront them. Just wait for the police. I'm getting on the first helicopter off this rig. I don't care what it costs." I hung up and sat down in the hallway with my back against the mahogany chest, and I waited. Inside the bedroom, I could hear confusion starting to build in Ashley's voice. "Did you hear something?" she asked. "Is someone out there?" "Probably just the old lady shuffling around," Trey said dismissively. "Don't worry about it. We'll have these papers filed tomorrow morning, and by next week, she'll be in a nursing home wondering what happened." That's when I decided it was time to let them know exactly who they were dealing with. "The old lady heard every word, Trey," I called through the door, my voice carrying with the clarity I'd perfected in 40 years of union meetings where I'd had to make myself heard over factory floor noise. "And the old lady has locked you both inside with your crimes." The scrambling sound that followed was almost comical, running footsteps and something falling, and Shalley's voice rising to a panicked shriek. "Bernice!" she screamed. "Open this door right now!" I settled more comfortably against the chest, my phone in my hand, already recording every word they were about to say. "I don't think so, sweetheart," I replied calmly. "You two just sit tight and think about what you've done. The police are on their way." By the time Officer Patricia Martinez arrived 12 minutes later, half my neighborhood was standing outside my house. Word travels fast in a community where everyone knows everyone, and apparently Mrs. Henderson had seen the police cars and started calling people. "Mrs. Kowalski," Patricia said when I opened the door. "What exactly is happening here?" I stood up slowly, every one of my 68 years evident in the way my joints protested, and I handed her my phone. "Officer Martinez," I said. "If you listen to that recording, you'll hear my daughter-in-law and her accomplice discussing in detail how to forge guardianship documents and commit real estate fraud. The forged documents are currently spread across my bed, where they were having their business meeting while planning to have me declared mentally incompetent." Patricia took my phone and listened, her expression growing grimmer with each passing second. "And the chest blocking the door?" she asked. "Making sure they couldn't destroy evidence before you arrived," I replied. "How did you move something that heavy?" she asked, looking at the mahogany chest with obvious skepticism that a woman my age could have managed it. 40 years of union work, officer," I said. "I'm stronger than I look, and I wash highly motivated." Within an hour, my house had transformed into something between a crime scene and a media event. Robert Chen arrived with his briefcase full of legal documents, and 3 more police officers showed up to manage the growing crowd of neighbors. Then the television news vans started parking on my street, cameras and reporters drawn by police scanners and the neighborhood gossip network. "Patricia, how do you want to handle opening the door?" Robert asked. "We've photographed everything from out here," Patricia replied. "I think it's time to see what they've got inside." She gestured to 2 officers who moved the chest with considerable effort, and when they opened the bedroom door, the scene inside was exactly what I'd described. Ashley and Trey were standing in the middle of my bedroom surrounded by papers, both of them looking guilty and terrified in equal measure. "Mrs. Ashley Kowalski, Mr. Trey Sterling," Patricia said formally, "you're both under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and forgery." The forensic photographer moved immediately, documenting every paper spread across my bed and nightstand. I watched from the hallway as they photographed the forged guardianship petition, bearing what was supposed to be my signature. A fake medical assessment from a doctor I'd never met, claiming I showed signs of severe dementia and confusion. A property appraisal that inflated my house's value to justify immediate sale. A purchase contract between Ashley and Sterling Development, LLC, for $2.2 million. An application for an emergency demolition permit citing structural concerns that didn't exist. Every piece of their scheme laid out in black and white, documented and photographed, and utterly damning. Outside on my front porch, with cameras rolling and neighbors watching, I gave my first statement. "My name is Bernice Kowalski," I said, looking directly into the cameras. "My husband Walter and I spent our lives working in the steel mills and building this home with our own hands. Tonight I caught my daughter-in-law and her accomplice, Trey Sterling of Sterling Development, attempting to forge guardianship documents. Their plan was to have me declared mentally incompetent so they could steal this house, demolish it, and build luxury condos that nobody in this neighborhood could afford. But they underestimated a 68-year-old union negotiator who spent 40 years learning to spot fraud and fight back. The cameras loved it, and within 2 hours, Grandmother Stop's demolition plot was trending on every local news station. But I wasn't finished yet, because while Robert was reviewing the forged guardianship papers, he noticed something that made him smile for the first time that evening. "Bernice," he said quietly, showing meth documents, "these papers don't just claim you're unable to manage your affairs. They specifically state you're showing signs of dementia and confusion." "That's not just fraud," I said, understanding immediately where he was going. "That's defamation, and it gives us grounds to go after Sterling Development and everyone involved in this scheme." "Exactly," Robert confirmed. "And speaking of Sterling Development, I think now might be the right time to play your trump card." I pulled out the envelope I'd been keeping in my desk for 2 weeks, the official letter from the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission. Robert read it slowly, then looked up at me with something like awe in his expression. "Bernice, this is a historic landmark designation," he said. "Your house is now protected by state law and cannot be demolished under any circumstances." "I applied for it 6 months ago," I explained. "The day Ashley moved in, actually. Took this long to get approved, but Walter always said patience beats panic." Inside my bedroom, where Ashley and Trey were being processed, I could hear Ashley's voice rising to a shriek. "You can't keep us locked in here," she was screaming. "This is illegal detention. We'll sue you for everything you have." I walked to the open bedroom door and spoke calmly. "Ashley, honey," I said, "you should probably stop talking, because every word you say is being recorded as evidence of your state of mind and criminal intent. And by the way, that house you were planning to demolish? It's been designated as a historic landmark by the state of Pennsylvania. You couldn't tear it down if you owned it outright, which you never will." The silence that followed was absolutely beautiful. Then Trey's voice, all the confidence and swagger completely gone. "That's impossible," he said. "We checked the records 6 months ago." "You checked 6 months ago," I replied. "The designation came through 2 weeks ago, and I've been waiting for exactly the right moment to mention it." "Congratulations. You both provided that moment." Patricia led them out in handcuffs, Ashley crying with mascara running down her face in black streaks. Trey looking like a man watching his entire criminal empire collapse in real time. My lawyer, Robert, spent the next 3 hours on the phone with the district attorney, and what he learned made everything make terrible sense. Trey Sterling had been running this exact scam in 3 other neighborhoods across eastern Pennsylvania. The pattern was always the same. Identify vulnerable elderly homeowners living alone in valuable properties, seduce or manipulate a family member, forge guardianship papers claiming incompetence, acquire the property through the compromised family member, and demolish it before anyone could object. He'd done it at least 7 times that they could prove, displacing families and destroying history for profit margins that made my stomach turn. But Trey had made a critical mistake when he picked my family, because he'd assumed I was just another confused old lady who could be easily manipulated and discarded. He didn't count on the fact that I'd spent 40 years as a union negotiator, learning to read contracts and spot fraud, and never, ever trust someone who smiled too much while making promises. Travis arrived 36 hours later, looking like he'd aged a decade during his emergency flight from the North Sea. I met him at the door, and he wrapped his arms around me without saying a word, just held me while his shoulders shook. When he finally pulled back, his face was wet with tears. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking,
I'm so sorry. I should have been here. I should have protected you.
I pulled back and looked him directly in the eye. "Travis," I said firmly,
You were doing your job, providing for your family.
"that's honorable work and nothing to apologize for. What Ashley did, that's on her, not you."
But I didn't see it, he protested.
"I married her. I brought her into our family, and I was too blind to see what she really was." "Love makes us blind sometimes," I said gently. "Your father and I raised you to see the best in people, and that's not a flaw, even when people abuse it." "I'm not going back to the rig," Travis said suddenly. "I'm staying here. I'm getting a job locally. I'm never leaving you alone again."
Travis, you love that work, I protested.
"I love you more," he said. "This is where I belong, here in Steeltown, protecting what Dad built." "The community college is hiring," he continued. "Industrial safety instructor, teaching the next generation how to work safely. I can use my experience, and I can be here." "Your father would be so proud," I said, fresh tears starting.
I hope so, Travis replied.
"I hope I can make up for what I lafappin." "You already are, son," I said. "You already are." The legal proceedings moved faster than I'd expected, probably because the evidence was so overwhelming, and the district attorney was eager to make an example. Ashley pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit fraud and forgery, accepting a plea deal that gave her 3 years, with the possibility of parole after 18 months. I attended her sentencing, watching her stand before the judge in an orange jumpsuit instead of designer clothes. And I felt nothing but sadness for the waste of it all. Trey Sterling faced federal charges for running a criminal enterprise across state lines, and the evidence from my case opened investigations into his other victims. He's currently serving 8 years in federal prison, and Sterling Development collapsed under the weight of lawsuits from families seeking restitution. But the real victory came 3 months after that terrible Tuesday night. The town council, responding to public pressure generated by our case and the media coverage it received, designated the entire Steeltown neighborhood as a historic preservation district. Every house that Sterling Development had threatened, every family that had lived in fear of being bought out and displaced, was now protected by the same state law that protected my home. Mrs. Henderson cried when the announcement was made, standing in the town hall with 50 other neighbors who'd fought to preserve our community. "We won, Bernice," she said, gripping my hands. "We actually won." Travis took his teaching position at the community college and converted the old carriage house behind my home into an office for the newly formed Steeltown Heritage Foundation. We give tours of the neighborhood now, walking groups through streets that tell the story of mill workers and immigrant families who built lives that mattered. We make sure people remember that progress doesn't have to mean destruction, that history has value beyond the dollar amount someone will pay to erase it. Last month, I was sitting in my front parlor reading when I noticed a young couple walking by, pushing a baby stroller and stopping to admire my house. They stood for a long moment looking at the stained glass window in my stairwell, the one Ashley had called dark and depressing. Their baby, maybe 8 months old, looked up at the window just as the afternoon sun hit it perfectly. Colored light spilled across the child's face, painting it in reds and blues and golds, and the baby laughed with pure delight, reaching tiny hands toward colors that had been made beautiful more than a century ago. The mother smiled and pointed at the window, saying something to her partner I couldn't hear but could imagine. "Look at that," she probably said. "Isn't it beautiful?" That's when I knew Walter's gift had been preserved. Not just the physical house, but everything it represented. History and dignity, and the idea that some things are worth more than the money someone will pay to destroy them. I still sleep in the bedroom where it all happened, and the mahogany chest is back in its place by the window, where it sat for 40 years. Sometimes I run my hand across its surface and remember the night it became more than furniture. The night it became a barrier between my family's history
and those who wanted to erase it for profit.
I'm 68 years old, and I stopped a criminal organization by moving one piece of furniture and knowing exactly when to use every skill I'd learned in 40 years of union work.
Not bad for an old lady who was supposedly too confused to manage her own affairs.
So I'm asking you now, what would you have done in my situation? Would you have confronted them directly? Or would you have done what I did and gathered evidence before making your move?
Have you ever had to fight to protect something that mattered from people who saw it as nothing more than a transaction?
Leave your thoughts in the comments because I genuinely love to hear your perspective. And if this story meant something to you, if it reminded you that age doesn't equal weakness and that history is worth preserving, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. There are more stories where this came from. Stories about ordinary people who stood up to protect what mattered. Thanks for listening to mine.